The savage battle raged on the slopes of Hill 187. Pressed by machine gun fire from concrete bunkers, the men of the 101st Airborne Division slowly but steadily progressed up the hill. Using grenades and satchel charges, they eliminated one after another enemy stronghold. Yet whenever they thought they had the enemy in their hands, more and more of them seemed to emerge from nowhere, even from bunkers they had just cleared. Hill 187 had become an anthill with swarms of Vietcong pouring out to attack the Americans from every direction. At the end of the day, it took 3 well-placed 250-pound bombs to finally silence enemy resistance. The bombs, however, also revealed the secret that tormented the paratroopers for the entire battle. The hill they fought so hard to capture was a true anthill, crisscrossed with a network of tunnels and rooms. The complexity of it left the Americans baffled. At this moment, they realized what kind of resilient and cunning enemy they were facing. A resourceful enemy. The Vietnam War was a conflict of evolving tactics and combat techniques. What the Americans believed would be the display of their overwhelming power in conventional warfare turned into guerrilla warfare against a resilient enemy. This enemy, the Viet Cong, was nowhere near the might of the American armed forces that consisted of pinpoint artillery support, armored units, fighter bombers, strategic bombers, and helicopter gunships combined with advanced surveillance, reconnaissance, and intelligence capabilities. The Viet Cong simply needed to find alternative ways to counter the overwhelming firepower of the Americans. For this, they only had the dense jungle and their formidable resourcefulness. To survive against unfavorable odds, the Viet Cong adopted various tactics. They moved mainly at night, quickly covering long distances. They spread out their units to minimize their exposure and used belt-hugging tactics during engagements. This meant staying close to their enemies to prevent them from using heavy artillery and air support. One of the strategies in this effort was digging tunnels. It was something that the Viet Cong were particularly good at. The amount of tunnels dug by the Viet Cong and NVA was comparable only to those in World War I. They created extensive underground networks to hide and protect themselves from the American enemy and their massive firepower, but also as a means of outmaneuvering the enemy during the offensive operations. However, tunnel systems were not the invention of the Vietnam War. They had their beginnings in the late 1940s during the First Indochina War with France. Initially, they were used to hide wanted individuals and later entire families as the conflict intensified. Over time, entire villages and guerrilla units found refuge in these tunnels. By the time the American forces arrived in 1965, the tunnels became well developed and continued to expand in response to evolving conflict. Battlefield recovery and pilfering were significant methods of acquiring materials. Americans and other free world units were often lax in removing battlefield litter, which the VC scavenged. Also, they relied heavily on temporary fire support bases for acquiring material. When these bases were closed, materials like concertina wire, barbed wire picket stakes, and field telephone wire were supposed to be recovered. However, undamaged materials were often left behind and carted off by the VC. Even items deemed unusable, such as bent pickets and broken timber, were valuable to the VC. Digging a tunnel required a lot of time, resources, and manpower. Entire units could go underground, creating full living and working spaces. The land in Vietnam varied greatly. In the mountains, there was a lot of granite and limestone, which often formed natural caves and ravines. Coastal regions had sandy or clay soils in areas with sandstone. Sandstone was perfect for tunneling because it didn't need support. Another common soil was laterite, a reddish-brown, hard soil rich in iron oxide. It was tough to dig through but provided good support for tunnels. Digging tunnels was slow and hard work. Dirt was put into baskets and pulled into the entry shaft, then carted away or dumped in a river. Even small tunnel systems produced a lot of dirt, which couldn't be left near the tunnel site. One method was to dig a series of vertical shafts every 10 meters. 2 teams would dig in opposite directions from each shaft towards the next one. This way, each team only had to dig 5 meters, making the work go faster. Most shafts would be filled back in. and some had bamboo air vents installed. For deep tunnels, the dirt had to be carried up long shafts to the surface. For shallow tunnels, a long bamboo pole was used to lift dirt baskets out of the shaft. Deep tunnels needed a bamboo tripod over the shaft with baskets hoisted by rope and pulley. Everyone in the village helped with the tunneling. Young men and women formed small teams. One person dug, one hauled dirt back to the shaft, and others hoisted it out. Other teams disposed of the dirt and cut wood for support. Old men made baskets and air vents and fixed tools. Older women cooked and cared for children. Kids collected camouflage materials, delivered woods, and ran errands. Each worker was expected to remove half to 1 cubic meter of dirt a day, depending on their age, health, soil density, and weather. Once the tunnel was finished, local families were given specific tunnel sections to maintain. Life underground. Living in the tunnels was anything but comfortable. The tight spaces, constant darkness, poor air, and fear of discovery were everyday challenges. While some say people stayed underground for years, this is mostly an exaggeration. However, in areas with frequent enemy sweeps, people did spend long periods underground, afraid to come out even at night. Light sources were rare. Sometimes there were hand or foot-powered lights or battery-powered ones in command centers and communication rooms. More often, tunnel residents used candles, kerosene lamps, oil lamps, or flashlights. Nut oil lamps were made from large cartridge casings with a wick. Long periods in the dark could cause fear and claustrophobia. Natural hazards like cave-ins, flooding, and low oxygen were common. The work to expand and repair tunnels and maintain supplies was never-ending. In a close, damp environment, diseases spread quickly. Tunnels were also home to spiders, centipedes, scorpions, mosquitoes, fleas, roaches, ants, snakes, rats, mice, and bats, all of which could bite, sting, or carry diseases. Cooking inside the tunnel was particularly difficult as kitchens were often filled with smoke. People might cook outside at night or rely on villagers to deliver food. Hot meals were rare, and grilled rats were considered a treat. Personal hygiene was poor, bathing was impossible in the dirty tunnels, and water was often scarce. There were 3 ways to dispose of human waste. Large earthenware jugs with lids were buried in latrine rooms and sealed once full. Metal ammunition cans, sealed with rubber gaskets, were used as chamber pots and emptied outside at night. In emergencies, people dug small holes where they happened to be. The smells of waste, wounds, illness, mold, smoke, food, weapons, oil, body odor, earth, and corpses filled the air. Yes, even the corpses. The Vietcongs paid so much attention not to leave traces of their presence that sometimes they even buried their dead in the tunnels. When enemy forces were nearby, tunnel inhabitants stayed silent and moved as little as possible. Despite this, there were times when voices were heard through vents and hidden trapdoors. To protect against gas attacks, homemade gas masks were made from parachute cloth and linen with charcoal filters. In desperate times, they used urine-soaked rags as makeshift masks. Whenever the American forces entered an area, the enemy would disappear into the tunnels. They could then move to other areas to bring reinforcements to launch hit-and-run attacks before vanishing underground again. Tunnels were used to conduct large-scale ambushes, move troops to attack sites, transport rockets to attack bases, and reposition units without detection. Some tunnels emerged near potential helicopter landing zones. The first major operation to discover this extensive tunnel system was Operation Crimp in January 1966, conducted by the 25th Infantry Division and 173rd Airborne Brigade with the 1st Battalion Royal Australian Regiment. A year later, these units, joined by the 1st Infantry Division and 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment, conducted Operation Cedar Falls in the same area. American and Australian tunnel rats explored thousands of meters of tunnels, recovering significant equipment, supplies, and documents. Despite high enemy casualties, these operations did not pacify the area or uncover the full extent of the tunnels. Civilians were often relocated to government-controlled areas, but the VC fighters remained and continued the fight. The tunnel expansion continued throughout the war. Tunnel rats. During the Vietnam War, the labyrinthine Cu Chi tunnels, as well as any other tunnel in South Vietnam, posed a significant challenge for American forces. This forced the United States to form a squad of tunnel rats, slim, small-bodied men who probed tunnels and used sniffer dogs to find and destroy these Vietcong subways. The first step in identifying tunnel locations involved keen observation. Soldiers learned to spot subtle indicators, slight depressions in bamboo thickets, worn spots on bamboo stalks used as handholds, urine trails and vegetation away from paths, faint trails ending at foliage clumps, and the smell of freshly cooked food in seemingly deserted huts. Lone women or children nearby often indicated closed and camouflaged tunnel entrances. The distinct smell of new mom, a strong fish sauce, also hinted at nearby VC activity. Once tunnels were suspected, the search began immediately. Scout dogs and people sniffer devices designed to detect human presence were deployed to find enemy bases. However, discovering a tunnel entrance was just the beginning. The next step was to secure the area and check for booby traps. Viet Cong tunnels acted as subways for North Vietnam during the war to take over the United States war machine. Today, many of these tunnel systems still exist and have been turned into tourist destinations where people can crawl through them. At the end of the tour, souvenir shops sell war-related paraphernalia, like genuine pairs of rubber sandals in the styles worn by soldiers on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Attendants at the shops wear black pajamas and rubber sandals, just as the Viet Cong did. However, these tunnels carry a violent past for those who experienced them in the past, as they acted as a bloodline for war.